The late August sun was hot in Westbrook, Massachusetts. Emily Harrison stood outside her new home, a simple two-story house with white paint that was starting to fade and dark green shutters. She was only 9 years old, but had already traveled far, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Now, she was in a small, quiet town that felt like something from a movie. "What do you think, sweetheart?" her dad, Samuel Harrison, asked. His deep voice had a strong Australian accent, and some neighbors had already looked at them curiously. He stood next to the moving truck, tall and strong, with his straight posture showing his years in the Royal Australian Navy. Emily pushed up her wire-rimmed glasses and tried to sound happy. "It's different from home?" Samuel's serious face softened as he looked at his daughter. He was 42 years old, with dark hair that was starting to turn gray and wrinkles around his eyes from his years in the Navy. "Give it time, love. Different doesn't mean bad." They spent the afternoon unpacking boxes. Their voices echoed in the empty house, which smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. Emily's bedroom was smaller than her old one, but it had a window seat that looked out into the backyard, where a big old oak tree stood. She carefully placed her books on the built-in shelves, old books from Australia that her mom had given her, along with new American ones she had bought to help her fit in. "Mom would have loved this window seat," Emily said softly, running her hand over the cushion. She always wanted one for reading. Samuel stopped in the doorway, holding a box labeled Emily's winter clothes. It had been 3 years since her mom, Charlotte, passed away from cancer, but moments like this still made his heart ache. "Yeah, she would have loved it. She probably would have fought you for it too." Emily smiled a little. "She would have let me share sometimes." That evening, they sat on the floor of their empty living room, eating their first American dinner, pizza. Emily picked at her slice, her stomach tight with worry. "Dad," she said, setting down her half-eaten pizza, "what if the kids at school don't understand me? What if they think I talk funny?" Samuel wiped his hands on a paper napkin. "They might at first. People here aren't used to our accent. But you know what? That makes you special. Different is okay." "I don't want to be different," Emily muttered, hugging her knees. "I just want to be normal." "Normal is boring," Samuel said. "Besides, you have your mother's spirit. Remember what she always said?" Emily nodded and repeated the familiar words. "Better to be different and real than normal and fake." Samuel smiled. "That's my girl." He gently tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "And you've got me always." That night, after Emily went to bed, Samuel sat in his study, unpacking his own boxes. He carefully placed his Navy medals and old photos on his desk. His new job in Boston had been a lucky break, a way to give Emily a fresh start after losing her mom. He picked up a family photo from the beach back home. Charlotte was smiling in the picture, even though she had already been sick. "I'll take care of our girl," he whispered to the photo, "no matter what." The next morning was cool and clear, a perfect New England late summer day. Emily stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her school uniform, a navy blazer, gray skirt, and white shirt. The Westbrook Middle School crest felt strange on her chest. "Ready for battle, soldier?" Samuel asked from the doorway, trying to make her smile. Emily stood tall like he had taught her. "Ready as I'll ever be, sir." The drive to school was quiet. Westbrook Middle School was a big, brick building with tall white columns. It looked fancy and a little scary. Students rushed up the steps, their loud American voices filling the air. Samuel pulled up to the drop-off zone and turned to Emily. "Remember what we talked about? Head high, shoulders back, like a proper sailor's daughter." Emily finished their old joke with a small smile. "That's my girl." Samuel watched as she stepped out of the car. She adjusted her glasses one last time and walked toward the entrance. She looked so small among the American kids. He waited until she disappeared inside before driving away. He didn't know what challenges she would face, but whatever happened, they would get through it together. At first, school wasn't too bad. Some kids asked about her accent and seemed interested. But by the second week, the curiosity faded and something worse took its place. It started in history class. Mr. Thompson, the teacher, called on her. "Miss Blackwood, since you're from Australia, maybe you'd like to share the British point of view on the American Revolution?" Emily's face turned red as everyone looked at her. "I'm Australian, sir. Not British." "Ah, Australia," Mr. Thompson said. "Another old prison colony that somehow managed to become civilized. Some students laughed. During lunch, a boy named James Carter and his friends sat near her. James was tall and strong, already looking like a football player. "Hey, Crocodile Dundee," he called out. "Where's your kangaroo?" Emily ignored him, but her hands trembled. "I'm trying to eat," she said. "Oh, sorry," James said in a fake Australian accent. "I'm trying to eat." His friends laughed. "Did you hear that? The convict is trying to eat." Emily stood up to leave, but James stuck his foot out. She tripped, her lunch tray crashing to the floor. More laughter. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Someone wrote, "Go back to Prison Island" on her locker. Her gym clothes were thrown in a toilet. Mr. Thompson kept embarrassing her in class. One day, James and his friends cornered her. "Got a present for you," they said, dumping a bag of toilet water over her head. Emily stood there, wet and smelling awful, as kids walked by without helping. That was it. Dripping, she marched straight to the principal's office. The secretary tried to stop her, but she didn't care. She pushed the door open, leaving wet footprints on the carpet. Principal Williams looked up from her desk, her fancy suit neat and perfect. She stared at Emily, shocked by what she saw. Emily stood in the principal's office, shaking as she spoke. "They poured toilet water on me," she cried. "James Carter and his friends have been bullying me for weeks. Even Mr. Thompson, my teacher, encourages them." "Slow down," Principal Williams said, raising her hand. "These are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" Emily pulled out her phone. "I started recording how Mr. Thompson treats me and the mean things James says." Principal Williams frowned. "Recording without permission is against school rules," she said. "And Mr. Thompson is one of our best teachers. I find it hard to believe he would do anything wrong. But look at me." Emily pointed at her wet uniform. "I'm covered in toilet water." Principal Williams sighed, as if she was tired of Emily. "Miss Blackwood, moving to a new country can be difficult. Maybe you're just not used to how things work here." "Not used to it?" Emily's voice cracked. "They push me into lockers. They steal my things. I understand you're upset," Principal Williams interrupted. "But blaming other students and teachers is very serious. You should focus on fitting in instead of causing trouble." Emily stood there, dripping water onto the fancy carpet, realizing no one was going to help her. "You're not going to do anything, are you?" "I'll give you a pass to change into your gym clothes," Principal Williams said, already looking at her computer. "And you should delete any recordings before they get you in trouble." Emily walked to the gym, changed, and sat through her classes in a daze. During history, Mr. Thompson kept calling on her, making fun of her messy clothes. That afternoon, she decided to record the bullies again. Hidden behind lockers, she filmed James and his friends picking on a younger boy who had trouble speaking. She didn't hear Mr. Thompson walking up behind her. "Miss Blackwood," his voice made her jump. "Give me your phone." "But No." His hand stretched out. With shaking fingers, Emily gave him the phone. She watched as he deleted everything. "Recording is a serious offense," he said, pretending to sound concerned. "I'm afraid you'll have detention every day next week." "That's not fair," Emily shouted. Mr. Thompson leaned in close and whispered, "Life isn't fair, Miss Blackwood. And if I catch you recording again, you'll see just how unfair it can be." That night, Emily sat at her desk, tears filling her eyes. She wanted to tell her dad, but she remembered what he said before they moved. He had told his sister, "This job is a fresh start for Emily. She needs this." Emily wiped her eyes and opened her history book. She was a Blackwood. She could handle this. But her dad, Samuel Harrison, was starting to notice things. The phone she lost, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly, the sadness in her eyes. And Samuel, a former Royal Australian Navy officer, was about to find out that some enemies didn't wear uniforms. Some sat in classrooms and behind desks. One evening, Samuel heard a crash from the bathroom. "Emily," he called. "Are you okay?" "Fine." Her voice sounded nervous. Samuel hesitated, then silently walked upstairs. The bathroom door was slightly open. Through the gap, he saw Emily lifting her shirt, revealing a huge bruise on her ribs. Bloody tissues were on the counter from another nosebleed. "Jesus Christ," Samuel whispered. Emily spun around. "Dad, I was just..." "Don't," Samuel said quietly. "Show me." "It's nothing," Emily said. Show me. Slowly, she lifted her shirt again. There were more bruises on her arms and body. Who did this? Samuel's voice was calm, but his eyes were full of anger. Emily burst into tears and told him everything. About James, about the toilet water, about Principal Williams ignoring her, about Mr. Thompson's threats. Samuel's face grew harder with every word. When she finished, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner, love? You worked so hard to get this job. I didn't want to ruin everything." Samuel hugged her gently. "Nothing is more important than you. Nothing." That night, after Emily fell asleep, Samuel sat in his study. He opened a small notebook and wrote down every name she had mentioned. Then he started researching. James's father was a rich real estate developer. Michael Chin's mother was on the school board. Principal Williams had been in charge for 15 years. Mr. Thompson lived alone, 2 miles from the school. Samuel opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a small box from his Navy days. He hadn't needed it in years. But now, he lifted the lid. Inside were black gloves, a mask, and tools from his old job. He checked each one carefully. "Right," he murmured. "Let's talk about consequences." For the next week, Samuel observed. He took notes on James's routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, James walked home alone from basketball practice. Samuel circled a dark spot between the street lights on James's route. A perfect place. One evening, Samuel waited. When James entered the dark area, Samuel moved quickly. Before James could scream, a strong hand covered his mouth. Another gripped his arm. "Day, mate," Samuel whispered in his thick Australian accent. "Remember Emily Harrison?" James's eyes widened in fear. Scared, Samuel tightened his grip. "Good. That's how she feels every day." He spun James around and pressed him against a tree. The basketball rolled away into the dark. "Every single day. Please," James whimpered. Toilet water? Lockers? Ring a bell?" Samuel asked. James started crying. "Here's what's going to happen," Samuel said. "You're going to leave Emily alone. Completely. If I hear about one more problem, if I even see you looking at her funny, I'll be back. And next time," he let the words hang in the air, "I swear, I won't touch her." James sobbed. "Smart lad." Samuel gave him a small push. "Oh, and James, if you tell anyone about this, well, let's just say I know where you sleep." Samuel disappeared into the shadows. He watched as James grabbed his things and ran home, looking over his shoulder the whole way. The next day at school, Emily noticed a change. James avoided her completely. He looked terrified. At dinner, she said, "James Carter wasn't in class today. And at lunch, he wouldn't even look at me." Samuel focused on his food. Maybe he's finally growing up. Emily narrowed her eyes. "Dad, you wouldn't have done anything, right?" Samuel smiled. "Me? I'm just a boring security consultant." Thompson was trying to open his house door when Samuel walked up behind him. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," Samuel said in his deep Australian voice. "We need to talk about my daughter." Thompson turned around, confused. Then, he realized who Samuel was, just as Samuel punched him hard in the stomach. Thompson bent over, gasping for air. Before he could shout for help, Samuel pulled him inside and kicked the door shut behind them. "Please," Thompson wheezed. "I don't know who you are." Samuel punched him again, this time in the ribs. "I'm Emily Harrison's father. Do you remember now?" Thompson's eyes went wide with fear. "Mr. Blackwood, I can explain." "Explain what?" Samuel shouted, pushing him against the wall. "How you made my 9-year-old daughter feel small. How you let other kids bully her. Or maybe you want to explain why you deleted proof of the bullying from her phone." Thompson was drunk and slow. He tried to fight back, but Samuel easily dodged his weak punches. Samuel hit him again, this time in the side. "You see," Samuel said calmly, "in the Navy, they taught me how to hit someone so it hurts for a long time but doesn't leave marks." He pressed on Thompson's shoulder in a way that made him cry out in pain. For the next 15 minutes, Samuel carefully punched and kicked Thompson. Each hit was planned to hurt but not show. "This," Samuel said, hitting him again, "is for every time you made Emily cry. Every time you embarrassed her. Every time you ignored when other kids hurt her." When Samuel finally stepped back, Thompson lay on the floor, sobbing and shaking. Samuel knelt beside him and whispered, "If you ever go near my daughter again, this will feel like a soft warning compared to what I'll do next time. Understand?" Thompson nodded quickly, too scared to speak. Samuel stood up and fixed his gloves. "And if you're thinking about calling the police, just remember, I know where you live. Next time, I won't be so gentle." He left, closing the door behind him. As he walked back to his car, the cool night air felt good. His hands were steady, even after what he had just done. At home, Emily was still awake, reading in the living room. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked, looking up from her book. "You were out late?" Samuel smiled, his knuckles tingling under his gloves. "Just taking care of something, love. Everything's going to be fine now." But Samuel didn't know that what he did that night would cause big problems for their future. On Monday morning, everyone noticed that Mr. Thompson was not at school. Instead, a young teacher took his place. She looked nervous and confused. At lunch, Emily heard students whispering. "Did you see Mr. Thompson's car?" one boy asked. "He could barely walk this morning. I heard he got into a fight at the bar on Friday night," another kid said. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She thought about her dad's swollen knuckles at breakfast. Deep inside, she knew something had happened. The next day, the principal spoke on the school speakers. "Mr. Thompson is taking a long break due to an accident." That afternoon, Emily saw James, one of the bullies, staring at her. His face was pale. "It was your dad, wasn't it?" he whispered as she walked past. Emily didn't answer, but her heart pounded. She remembered the bruises on James's arm. She remembered how another bully, Michael, flinched when he saw her. It all made sense now. At home, Emily found her dad in his study, cleaning dried blood from his nails. "Dad," she asked, "what did you do to Mr. Thompson?" Samuel looked up. "Why do you think I did something?" "Please don't lie." Emily's voice shook. "I know it was you, just like with James and Michael and the others." Samuel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Sometimes people need to understand consequences. By hurting them, by giving them exactly what they gave you," Samuel said firmly. "An eye for an eye." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, thinking about all the times she had been afraid. Did it feel good, hurting them? Samuel sighed. "No, but seeing you smile again, that feels good." Before Emily could say anything else, flashing red and blue lights filled the window. Police cars pulled up outside their house. Samuel stayed calm. "Emily, go to your room. Stay there no matter what." "Dad." "Now, love." He kissed her forehead. "Remember, Blackwoods protect each other." Emily ran upstairs just as loud knocking filled the house. From her window, she watched the police take her father away in handcuffs. He didn't struggle. He stood tall, proud, even as they put him in the car. He looked up at her window and gave her a small smile. Then she saw the principal, Mrs. Williams, watching from across the street, looking pleased. Emily sat on her bed, hugging her mother's old jersey. She thought about fairness, about standing up to bullies, about what her father had taught her. Then she picked up her phone and started typing. "Dear School Board, I want to tell you about the bullying at Westbrook Middle School and how Principal Williams ignored it." The newspaper headline read, "Former Australian Navy officer arrested for attacking teacher." Emily ignored the messages from classmates and focused on her plan. She had gathered everything. Pictures of her bruises, recordings of Mr. Thompson's mean words, emails to the principal that were ignored, and messages from other bullied kids. That afternoon, she went to the police station. "I need to see Detective Reynolds," she said. The detective, a sharp-eyed woman, listened as Emily showed her all the proof. "Why didn't you show this earlier?" Reynolds asked. "Would you believe a 9-year-old over a teacher?" Emily said bitterly. "Principal Williams didn't. The school board didn't. So my dad did what he had to do." For 2 hours, Emily told everything. By the end, Detective Reynolds was calling the district attorney. That evening, Emily visited her dad in jail. "You've been busy," he said. "I learned from the best," she smiled. At court, many parents and students showed up to support Samuel. The judge listened to everything before saying, "Mr. Blackwood, the law does not allow people to take justice into their own hands. But the system failed your daughter." Samuel was sentenced to 30 days in jail and 2 years of probation. But the school was now being investigated. 3 weeks later, Samuel came home. "Welcome back, Dad." Emily hugged him tightly. Good to be home, love. Any trouble while I was gone? Nope. Principal Williams quit. Mr. Thompson won't teach again. And even James apologized. Samuel smiled. Fear is a good teacher. But you know what's better? Standing up for yourself. Emily grinned. You taught me that. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Was it worth it? Emily asked. Samuel thought for a moment. Justice always has a price, love. The trick is making sure the right people pay it. Emily leaned against him. Thanks for making them scared instead of me. Samuel kissed the top of her head. That's what fathers do, love. That's what fathers do. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.